eyes have been on New Jersey, and eyes have been on New Jersey politics in a way that they hadn't been before, right? So when you had someone like Andy Kim, who personally, he's okay. He's a sort of liberal, down the line liberal who he swung a red district in 2018, I think, or 2020. So is a decent, and he could be punching left more than he is. So he's, okay, but he's not like a progressive, I don't think. But when you had someone like him who has this sort of character, he went viral on like January 7th, I think, for being photographed sweeping up, the insurrectionist debris after the Capitol riots. And he's seen as this like very, like, he loves like dad jokes, and he's seen as this like virtuous sort of candidate. When you see him being screwed over by a process like this, combined with the fact that New Jersey has been in the news around corruption, I think it just was the perfect storm. And that's what activists who I talked to in this piece described to me. And,
talk a bit more about Andy Kim's role in getting this overturned and changing the ballots for good in New Jersey, because people may not realize this, but the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, former Goldman Sachs guy, who very much used the county line to his advantage when he first got elected, had put up his wife, the First Lady of New Jersey, to run for Senate to replace Menendez. And Andy Kim had gotten a real head start. He's raised a lot of money. The voters in New Jersey want to get rid of Menendez. And it seemed to be a foregone conclusion that Andy Kim would be the next senator from New Jersey. But Phil Murphy said, no, my wife wants to run. And she started getting a lot of these endorsements, which would have meant that she could have been that county line candidate that could have been put over the edge just based on these endorsements. So take us through the how her entry into the race kind of made Andy Kim act in this way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Tammy Murphy's entry into the race, I think it was in November, like late November, sort of just blew up the entire race, right? Because like you said, Andy Kim had announced on the heels of these Menendez indictments that came down in September. I think it was that same week that that the news was broken that he had announced. So he had been in the race for 2 months. He was seen as, this complete foil, character foil, political foil to Bob Menendez, and the sort of runaway favorite in the primary. And then Tammy Murphy, who's the First Lady, she's a former registered Republican. She gave money to Republicans throughout the early 2000s. Who, who knows what her politics are personally, but she probably would have been like a standard run-of-the-mill Democratic senator had she been elected. But she, against the sort of Democratic mandate that existed, was collecting county endorsements, county party endorsements. And counties, there's 21 counties in New Jersey. Each of them, none of them are exactly the same with regards to how they, carry themselves. Some of them, endorse democratically, where they'll sort of take a vote at what they call a convention as to who will get the endorsement. Some of them are just, it's an executive committee that will just hand it down from the top down. And what you had was Andy Kim winning the endorsements of the more democratically oriented counties, and the ones that were top down, like these patronage network county parties, Tammy Murphy was sweeping those. And a lot of those are the really vote rich ones, the really populist ones. So she was going to have a huge advantage going into this, but it took, I think it was, Andy Kim, it was Menendez, it was the sort of perfect storm, and like the blatant like theft of this primary. Really, things started moving after the lawsuit was filed in late February. And when it was first filed, right, the county line was seen as this immovable thing for years, right? For years, New Jersey progressives especially had known that this was the biggest impediment to progressive politics in the state. So when Andy Kim first came out joined by 2 congressional candidates, came out with this lawsuit, it was sort of panned as this Hail Mary. Like, of course, this is not going to touch the county line. This has existed for decades. This is going to long outlast this race, right? But I think it was the perfect storm of grassroots support. And then you had machine politicians in counties like Hudson County who were coming out against the county line. You had the mayor of Jersey City, Steve Fulop, who's a gubernatorial candidate for 2025, you had him flip his endorsement from Tammy Murphy to Andy Kim. You
after the case was after the ballot county line was overturned on the ballot, he switched his endorsement. Before. Wow.
Yeah, about like a week or two before. So I think, New Jersey politicians are always going to see where the wind is blowing, right? Like, obviously they're self-serving in a way that, is cartoonish, right? Like we've seen with Bob Menendez, but you saw this tide turning in real time between the end of February and the end of March when the injunction was granted. So you had one of the biggest blows was actually the New Jersey Attorney General, who's a Murphy appointee, came out and said publicly that his office released a memo that said, we're going to not partake in this lawsuit because we don't find this to be constitutional, the county line in the first place. So we're going to stay out of this, which apparently, he's a Murphy appointee, right? And this absolutely incensed the governor to have one of his own just completely like drive the stake through the heart of the county line like this. And I think by like mid to late March, the tide was turning, and it was clear that even if the judge maintained that it was constitutional, everyone was scrambling. Like, politicians in Trenton were now scrambling to like have their workarounds because they want to keep the county line because they're the reason that they're in office is because of the county line, right?
Same with Phil Murphy. I mean, you write about this in your piece, how basically he bought these county endorsements because of how wealthy he was. I mean, he put $10 million of his own money into his 2017 gubernatorial campaign. Yeah.
Exactly. So in 2016, 2017, and there was, Tom Moran, who's one of the big op-ed writers in New Jersey, he writes for the Star Ledger, had this really great op-ed from 2016, sort of calling out Phil Murphy on literally just buying off the primary. There was a competitive primary. There were, I think, 3 or 4 candidates. I think there were 2 that were really progressive. Phil Murphy, who had never held elected office, he just had served as ambassador to Germany. And, these ambassadorships are given just to donors, right? So he had only been a Goldman Sachs employee before this, and he just sort of showered every county chair in money. And there are two counties that don't use the county line, and of course one of the counties that don't use the county line he lost in. That's the only county he lost in. I think it was Salem County that doesn't use the line.
Yeah. It was Jim Johnson, and I forget who the other candidate was.
It was Steve Wynowski, I think was his name. He was like a state senator.
Right. Jim Johnson, Montclair's own. So I knew him a little bit. I knew his kid. They lost really handily in a way that didn't make a ton of sense because of that exact county line endorsement. I think I remember the discourse around that being very much, Murphy got on the county line, so that's how things were going to go.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I guess to wrap things up here, do you foresee maybe not this election cycle, obviously, because we're too far down the line, but in 2026 and 2028, more and more progressive candidates taking a chance to run in New Jersey?
Yeah, I mean, I think. I don't know if this is like necessarily enough to like propel a progressive wave, but this is the biggest impediment by far, right? And I think, over the years, I've been involved in, political organizing and stuff, and I've talked to folks in these, organizations like Justice Democrats, organizations like Brand New Congress back in 2018 when they were sort of more active, and there were folks that would just say, of course, we're not going to touch New Jersey. There's no point, right? We're wasting our money there, right? So, this has been known in political circles that this line has existed, and it's discouraged progressive candidates and progressive organizations from really doing anything in the state. So I think if everything holds as it is, so right now there's been a preliminary injunction that's been granted by this federal judge, essentially meaning that for the Democratic primary of 2024, ballot lines cannot be, or like the county line can't be used, and what they're going to have to be used, office block is basically what every other thing uses, where it has President Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Senator Cory Booker, Bob Hugin or something, right? Like they'll have, it won't be like in this sort of confusing line format, right? It'll be just by office divided up, and you can't really in the same, it's not as obvious as to who the county endorsements are. But yeah, I think this is really going to throw the doors open, at least to organizations and to progressive energy. And I do think that and I think it's good for the national progressive movement, right? I think another source of like progressive
deep
energy.
blue state, right? Where
Yeah,
we can,
exactly.
you can almost just it's a these deep blue districts are the exact kind of like laboratory where
Oh,
these
exactly.
DSA candidates should be running. I mean, that's how
100%.
we got Ilhan Omar. That's how we got Rashida Tlaib. That's how we got AOC. This is where you can kind of put more progressives in Congress and increase leverage in that way. Anyway,
Exactly.
really appreciate your time today. Everyone can read the piece "Abolishing the Ballot Line Will Reshape Progressive Politics." It's in The Nation. Arvin Alaigh, writer, activist from New Jersey, getting his Ph.D. at University of Cambridge. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.